One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It is the best day of the week, and not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. I'm your host, Jim Lakely. I'm vice president of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that has been around for 40 years and is known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bring you the data, the science, the facts, the truth to counter the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and also like, share, and subscribe, and leave your comments underneath the video. These all convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program, and that gets the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, big tech and the legacy media do not really approve of the way that we cover climate and environment and energy on this program. So Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join friends of this program who support it and help bring this show to the world every single week. Any support you can give is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And we also want to thank our streaming partners, that being junkscience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. I hope you will find and follow all of their accounts on all of your favorite social media and video streaming outlets. We have a big show today. Gosh, I had so much I wanted to put into it, but we can only fit in so much for about an hour or so. But to go over all of it, we have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change. What's Up With That? Sterling Burnett. Sterling Burnett is the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. And we also have Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow at Heartland and the star of our Climate at a Glance video series. And of course, as always, Andy, the producer, is behind the scenes, making sure this show looks and flows great. And we want to welcome to the show today a very special guest, his first time on the show, but a longtime friend of all of us personally and of the Heartland Institute. That's Daren Bakst. He is the director of the Center for Energy and Environment at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI. I know Heartland Institute, all modesty aside, I think we're the best on climate in the world. But if I had to pick one who's right up there at the front lines with us, it would be the Competitive Enterprise Institute, who has been doing it for decades, just like us. They're based in Washington, D.C., and they're crushing it every single day. Daren, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. I'm excited. I didn't realize actually I was going to be on the show. I thought I was just doing some one little clip for you guys, but this is awesome. And yeah, CEI, we do work on climate realism, work on energy, environment. So yeah, check us out at cei.org. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
No, very happy to have you here, and actually very happy that you're surprised. Now we're going to get better reactions out of you as you have to endure about 75 minutes or so of climate realism broadcast to the world, and the hundreds of people, thousands of people that are watching live and participating in the chat. So that's always a lot of fun. All right. But before we get to our main topics today, we like to start off the show, as always, with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. Our first item here is crazy great news. I never thought I would live long enough to see this day. This comes from EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. Old gas cans are back, baby. Those obnoxious new gas cans that are intended to reduce gasoline fumes. They call them evaporative emissions to make them sound really dangerous. Supposedly to save the planet, they're no longer going to be mandatory, and we'll no longer have to watch YouTube videos to learn how to use these now specialized cans, and you have to learn a special skill just to fill your stupid lawnmower. So I found this, actually, it was Linnea who shared this with me this week. This is from Lee Zeldin's own tweet on X. He says, gas cans used to pour gas. Now they just dribble like a child's sippy cup. The Trump EPA's message to gas can makers is, vent the darn can and let it flow, baby, flow. Now I'm going to be hopefully soon getting rid of my old gas cans that I hate and getting the new ones that actually work, that have a vent and everything. So, rejoice, everyone. This is very good news. And Linnea, since you sent this to me, and you're a bit of a do-it-yourself kind of person, you said actually on X, Linnea, like, this is what I voted for. Me too. Amen, sister.
Well, this is a very minor victory in the grand scheme of things. I will say, though, I didn't realize that we were titling this section that the old cans are back, because unfortunately it's not that good.
Oh, no.
All it is that they are saying, they're reiterating to the manufacturers that you can have a vent, because the manufacturers have thought for years that the rules did not allow them to put a vent in because it would increase evaporative emissions from gasoline. This is Zeldin's team saying, no, please do put a vent in. Unfortunately, they are not getting rid, as I assumed based on the media buzz about it. I assumed that they were changing back to the old style cans. They are not. They are keeping the stupid one with the push lever and the springs and everything in it. I'm very disappointed in that fact, but it is a step in the right direction to at least be asking them to please make them pourable instead of having all of that just suction issue that gets caused by the current style. But really, I'm gonna send Zeldin an email and I'm gonna say, it's not the vent that's the problem, it's the spigot. Like it's the actual nozzle itself that's the problem. Please make that go away. We are not destroying the environment by having a few gas cans evaporating some fuel out of them. So yeah, I hate to put some cold water on that, but unfortunately it's not quite as good as I initially thought it was.
Well, you ruined my weekend.
I know. I'm sorry.
Gas cans. These gas cans are the perfect example of something designed by committee. And I got a couple of them, and I hate them too. But the no engineers were involved in making these gas cans. This was all about bureaucracy and committee and so forth. But I have a simple solution. The ones that I own, I just simply drill a hole in the back to put in a vent. And then I take a piece of duct tape, fold it over, make a flap, so I can just put it over that vent hole so that it doesn't, leak out during non-use times. The other thing I do is I take a handheld drill and I drill out the spout. I just take a 1/2-inch drill and go in there and get rid of all that mechanism, and it pours just fine.
I have I had a better solution than Anthony's. My theory has always been, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I never replaced my old gas cans. I've still got gas cans with vents and little lengthy nozzles that go right into little holes. You people who have to buy everything new, No.
I'm not going to let you say that, Sterling. That's your generation privilege. I was born at a time when you could not buy a old gas can.
Generational privilege. I like that.
There's a whole black market, though, for these things on eBay.
Anthony can't get away with that claim, though. He bought it. He saw the shiny new gas can on the shelf and said, "Oh, I've got to have the new one." Not me.
I needed it at the moment. I couldn't wait for eBay or Amazon. But I will tell you this: it didn't take me more than about 2 minutes once I brought it home to turn it into a functional gas can using a drill.
There you go.
We're gonna have to do some DIY videos with Anthony showing us how to fix our gas can. I have three of them actually. One of them I use to mix the stuff for the 2-cycle engines, and the thing is like sucking in on itself. It looks like it's gonna open a new hole in the universe or something. It's like it's going in. It's so obnoxious. Daren, here's your chance to brag about how great your gas can is, if you care to do.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to say about gas cans. I don't really have any, but I am fascinated to learn more from Anthony about.
He's from DC. He has other people do his lawn work.
Yeah. Well, maybe Linnea's right. This is baby steps. She's going to send a letter to Lee Zeldin and actually send it to Trump. Send it to Chris Wright. This has to do with energy. Send it to him as well. Maybe we'll get this thing back to the nice gas cans that we had as we grew up. Generational privilege here. All right. Our second item today is one that I got from Anthony today. He always loves to seek out these predictions of how much time we have left to save the planet before we all die. And bad news, everyone. We've only got 3 years left. This comes to us from a publication online called The Conversation. Headline is "Only 3 years left. New study warns the world is running out of time to avoid the worst impacts of climate change." Where have we heard that before? So two Brits, a professor and a paper pushing manager at the University of Leeds, wrote a piece for The Conversation saying that we're running out of time. So listen up, and I'll just hit some of the highlights. They write, quote, "We are living in a world that is warming at the fastest rate since records began, yet governments have been slow to act." Now, one of those sentences is true, and I'll let you guess which one. They note in their piece that COP30 in Brazil, for which, by the way, they're raising virgin rainforest to build roads out in the middle of nowhere, that's coming up in just a few months, they note. And no countries are doing what they're supposed to be doing, they lament. They say, like you do, Sterling, that we've blown past 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, so that's gone. But here's the reason why we only have 3 days left and we're all doomed, or 3 years left and we're all doomed. Might as well be 3. They write, "Although last year's global temperatures were very high, they were also alarmingly unexceptional. The data speaks for itself. Continued record high levels of greenhouse gas emissions have led to rising atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. The result is rising temperatures that are rapidly eating into the carbon budget. This will be exhausted in less than 3 years at current levels of emissions." Now, Anthony, what is a carbon budget? And is that actually a real thing?
No, it's a social construct. There's no such thing as a carbon budget. I mean, you can make a budget on anything. You can make a budget on how much candy I want to eat, in a month. You can make a budget on, anything really. But it's a makeup, and they just make it up so that they can say, "You're out of the carbon budget. You're messing with the carbon budget." That's all it is. It's a scold. It's a statistical scold that they've created. But, we hear this only 3 years left every 3 or 4 or 5 years. We've had this come and go with Al Gore. We've had it come and go with James Hansen. We've had it come and go with, one of these guys over at the NSIDC who said, the Arctic ice, we've got 3 years to save the planet, all this stuff. And it's never happened. And they keep moving the goalpost further and further out into the future. And of course, those things never happen. Not one of these claims about we've only got X years left has come true. It is basically, I don't know, I'll just speak bluntly about it. It's bullshit deluxe. That's what this stuff is.
My question is that 3 years on top of the 5 years AOC once said we had, or the decade that Hansen said? And so are we adding 3 years, or is it starting afresh 3 years from now? Because like Anthony correctly pointed out, they've made similar predictions repeatedly just since I've been working on climate change. And if you want to look at broader environmental issues like starvation, species extinction, biodiversity loss, whatever, they make predictions. Oil, peak oil. Oh, we've gone past peak oil. They make these predictions. They've made them for the past century or longer, going back, honestly, to Malthus, at least, about food production and starvation. And as Anthony rightly said, never once, not a single time. Hundreds of predictions, never right. They make Johnny Carson's Karnak look like a predicting genius. It's just crazy that the press keeps publishing these things. They keep inviting people who've been wrong repeatedly in the past on to tell us how it's almost, this time it really, really is almost death time. The clock is ticking. How long have we had a nuclear clock? Never once have we, thankful for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, thankful for it. But, they move it up and they move it back and they move it up. These, they never move back. It's always, okay, this time we really mean it. It's 3 years.
Well, Daren, at least this time, we're probably, hopefully, God willing, we'll all be around 3 years from now to see if this prediction comes true.
Yeah, part of me actually kind of thinks like, if I was a researcher kind of on that side of things, well, gosh, I better do a study that says only 2 years left or something to get more attention. But I guess they don't want to be called out on it when in 3 years we'll be able to actually kind of call them out and say, hey, we're still around and everything's fine. The problem is we don't really call them out enough. Because like Sterling was saying, there's these constant predictions over and over and over. And then they create this artificial carbon budget idea. It means nothing. It's just a way to try to be able to say, well, we only have 3 years left, as relates to this artificial creation that we created that actually has no meaning. So it's completely meaningless, and it does a disservice and hurts the American people. It scares people all over the world. So I don't know. I think we need to kind of keep track of all these. Maybe we are, but we should just track all these predictions.
Yeah.
Well, I think, to be fair to you, Daren, and CEI, I think CEI has done a pretty good job and put out some reports tracking the failed predictions. I think the report was 50 years of failed predictions was one of those reports. You did a great job.
Yeah.
It's not just, though, that we don't call them out. We of course, don't have access to the media that they have on their side, the funding. But I'm not sure how scared people are getting of this, right? I think they're getting numb to these predictions. And I think if you were really smart, a smart alarmist, let's concede that there may be some out there, that you would predict farther out. So we do like the politicians do with laws. Oh, by 2050, this law will, they won't be in office. Many of them will be dead. So they won't suffer the consequences for all these things.
I feel like that they did, didn't they? Haven't they in the past? Didn't they make things like 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's my point. Is they always make it within people's lifespans. So we have seen repeatedly them fail. This one's even shorter, 3 years. Well, 3 years is nothing. Even most politicians that are in office will still around in 3 years. If you were a smart one, you'd say, "Oh yeah, in 2100." Death to everyone. The earth turns into a cinder. Flames will break out. The universe will be tired of us emitting CO2. And so in 2100, because no one will be able to call you out. No one alive now, or few alive now, will be able to call you out on that.
Yeah. Well, before we leave this subject, I just wanted to mention, maybe Linnea could comment on this idea that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming is this magic number that is super important. And if we pass it, we're in big, big trouble. I was in Paris during the COP over there when they came up with that 1.5 degrees Celsius number. It was a compromise. Some wanted 2, some wanted 1.3, some wanted 1.2. There is no science basis for this idea that we can't warm more than 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial times. And it's for people and supposed scientists to be taking that number with any seriousness just shows you how not serious they are.
Yeah. Well, it's constant. They're not going to give this up because the thing that they usually claim is that we only have like 3 years left, or we only have 2 years left, or we only have 10 years left before we start reaching tipping points. And those tipping points, it's actually kind of clever because you can say that they've been reached and that we are starting to see them every single time you get any kind of like not so great weather condition, or anytime you have a bad sea ice year, anything like that, they can say, look, we've gone over the tipping point. And then when it's good again, they're like, well, it's not going to be bad every year. So they can say that. They can try to weasel their way through it, but it's just it's pale and it's frail and it's getting frailer. I think people are getting tired of it. The only thing that they have going for them maybe is the sea level rise issue, but that's something that's easily overcome by coastal engineering programs, which many areas that would have any kind of threat from any degree of sea level rise whatsoever are already engaging in. So it's pretty much all just stuff that people aren't so worried about anymore. As we talked about, I don't know if you guys talked about on the show last week, actually, the statistics that are once again coming out showing that people are even less worried than they were 5 years ago about climate change today.
Yep.
Which is remarkable considering the amount of effort that the media has been putting into scaring people and working people up over it the last couple of years. They're losing it. And so they're, instead of, calming down and trying to be reasonable, they're doubling down and kind of like thrashing around a little bit. So we'll see what that does to them in the next couple of years here.
You know what would end this, I think? Any academic who makes a prediction, the institution that they work for, they should say, if you make a prediction, a testable prediction that fails to come true of this order, that the world is going to end, that we've reached a tipping point, or we will in X number of years, you lose your funding for the next 2 years. I wager those predictions end tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. But the management won't do that because they're in on the whole thing. Because, the whole climate thing is nothing but a grift. And, it gets funded because, it used to get funded. Now Trump's shutting off the tap. So there might be a chance. But, as long as there's money involved, they'll keep doing what they're doing.
Well, how you do that is the Trump administration says no funding to any academic that makes a prediction whose predictions don't come true within the time period. They cease to end funding.
But there's a lot of hedging here, as was said, is that it says only 3 years left until some tipping point or whatever it might be. And then it's such a weasel word or weasel, so that they can kind of just claim, well, yeah, whatever. There's no objective criteria to even know what the hell they mean by 3 years, we're going to reach the tipping point. Even climate change itself, the term, is a hedge. And back in the day, we used to call it global warming, or they would call it global warming. So the whole thing is hedging, so they can make bold predictions without actually really even saying anything, but still manage to try to scare people. And apparently it's not working. So that's at least some good news.
Right.
The only consistent tipping point I've ever seen is those little red birds that go up and down in water. you click, and those are tipping points that are real.
Wow. Talk about generational privilege. Linnea has no idea what you're talking about. All right. Let's move on to our third item in the crazy climate news. And this is an endangerment finding update. So we've talked about this on the Climate Realism show several times. So if you're a regular viewer, you are more well-informed than the readers of the New York Times. But this story by Lisa Friedman was run just this week. Let me read some from it, and we'll throw it to the panel. The Trump administration has drafted a plan to repeal a fundamental scientific finding that gives the United States government its authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions and fight climate change, according to two people familiar with the plan. The proposed Environmental Protection Agency rule rescinds a 2009 declaration known as the endangerment finding, which scientifically established that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane endanger human lives. The scientifically established is not accurate there, but we'll move on. That finding is the foundation of the federal government's only tool to limit the climate pollution from vehicles, power plants, and other industries that is dangerously heating the planet. Again, this is from the New York Times, as you can probably see. If the Trump administration is able to repeal the endangerment finding, it would not only erase all current limits on greenhouse gas pollution from cars, factories, power plants, and other sources, it would prevent future administrations from trying to tackle climate change with lasting implications. Finally, some good news. Here's the quote, and I'll throw it to Sterling. Quote, "The White House is trying to turn back the clock and relitigate both the science and the law," said Vicky Arroyo, who teaches environmental law at Georgetown. She called the evidence that climate change is harmful, quote, overwhelming and incontrovertible. Now, Sterling, I want to address the last business story, and also I want to hear from you as well, Daren. Number one, if Trump's EPA gets rid of the endangerment finding, is that really going to be permanent? This New York Times writer certainly thinks so, and that would be fantastic news. And two, it is in fact true that we are trying to relitigate the science and the law, because that's definitely necessary, because it's been corrupted over all of these years.
Well, this may be the first time that I've ever hoped that a New York Times writer was right. As you say, that it would be permanent. But I'm unconvinced. I'm not sure we'll actually see it take effect, even if they do the endangerment finding, because what will happen is the lawsuits will fly. Interest groups will file lawsuits. Democratic state AGs will file lawsuits. With the new criminal court ruling, international agencies will file lawsuits. My suspicion is that many will be found they don't have standing, but that will take time. And this may still be litigated when Trump leaves office. And so the question is, let's say it's successful, because Trump has one thing in his, we have fought the science. We have fought the science in the courts. We have fought the science at the regulatory agencies. I think the science is incontrovertible that climate change isn't a catastrophe. I think you look at the data on human health, human lifespans, crop yields, greening of the earth, no changes in hurricane, that there's just nothing bad happening. So they can't truthfully claim harm. But as much as we fought it, the courts have ignored data and followed rhetoric and fear. So I don't think we can win on the science in the courts. I'm unconvinced. But Trump has one big, let's call it a Trump card. West Virginia v. EPA. In that ruling, the Supreme Court said major decisions have to have specific legislative language, basically. That if Congress doesn't explicitly say something, then regulatory agencies can't be doing it. Now, that directly contradicts Mass v. EPA. And so they should be able to go to court and say, look, it's time to review, to relitigate Mass v. EPA, but in light of West Virginia v. EPA, because the people who sponsored the Clean Air Act, Democrats and Republicans alike, said we never intended to regulate CO2, and which is why CO2 is not listed as a pollutant in the language of the law. That was made up by the court. And if anything is a major question, it's restricting CO2 emissions from our economy. It affects everything. And so it's time for the court to throw out Mass, to recognize that a wrong under a different court, basically, was committed. And West Virginia is the corrective, and hopefully that will make it stick, unless Congress acts. Look, Congress has looked at the law multiple times. They have considered regulating CO2. They have considered limiting emissions. They've never once passed a law doing so, and the EPA and the Supreme Court should not be allowed to impose such a law.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I mean, it depends on what if the Trump administration undoes endangerment finding and then it gets litigated, it depends on like if it's based on the idea that the emissions from new motor vehicles, which is the relevant section, doesn't endanger public health or welfare, and that's kind of the basis, then know that's not going to be permanent, because a future administration can always try to make a different determination. But what I would expect, and what I am expecting, is that the Trump administration and the EPA specifically will be coming out with a rule and addressing endangerment, and also the vehicle tailpipe rule, the de facto mandate at the same time.
Yeah.
And what they're going to argue is they're going to make multiple legal arguments as to why they don't have to regulate greenhouse gases under that section in the first place. So then if the court winds up agreeing with those arguments, then that would prevent the ability to regulate greenhouse gases. And I think one argument Sterling's already brought up that I would make would be the major questions doctrine. And in 2007, at the time the Massachusetts versus EPA case was issued, there was major questions doctrine really was not fleshed out. And as Sterling said, what you need on major questions of if an agency is going to claim authority to answer questions of major political and economic significance, it needs to have clear congressional authorization for doing so. There is no, regardless of what you think about whether or not it authorizes greenhouse gas emissions, which of course I don't think it authorizes the regulation of greenhouse gas emissions in the Clean Air Act. It certainly is not clear congressional authorization. So if the court kind of brings in the major question doctrine and buys into the idea that it applies here and it's different than it was in 2007, then I think that's a very strong argument. There's other arguments too that I think are new that you could bring up from the legal perspective. At the time, the argument was that this Clean Air Act is not really appropriate there's all kinds of problems with trying to apply the Clean Air Act to the regulation of greenhouse gases. It's not structured in a way that makes that work. And then, maybe there was some doubt by certain justices that was true. But in 2014, there was a Supreme Court case called UARG versus EPA, which basically dealt with something called the tailoring rule, where the EPA basically had to rewrite the law because if they allowed to kind of apply the Clean Air Act the way they wanted, it would have led to what's called absurd results. They kind of had to rechange the entire statute. And now the court has seen how absurd it is to apply the Clean Air Act to greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a very good chance that they'll say, you know what, it's clear the Clean Air Act is not structured or designed to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So if it really is grounded in kind of a legal basis, as opposed to necessarily just simply the analysis of whether or not it endangers, then you could have a more permanent solution for this. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Well, yeah, I mean, Anthony, just yesterday I saw a story on Reuters that after they're anticipating a parade of horribles from their perspective, but after the Trump administration gets rid of the endangerment finding, they're also going to get rid of the ability to regulate automobiles. It says here from Reuters, they're going to repeal all greenhouse gas emission standards for light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles, according to a proposal that was apparently leaked to Reuters, based on what Daren just said, that the Clean Air Act does not authorize EPA to regulate tailpipe emissions.
Right. We're going to be going from cafe standards to smorgasbord standards. Anything goes.
Yeah.
In one sense, they've already done that, right? I mean, they basically gutted in the Big Beautiful Bill cafe standards because they said, yeah, we still have, first off, they have, through the Congressional Review Act, gutted California's ability to regulate automobiles, to mandate them for the nation as a whole. And then secondly, in the Big Beautiful Bill, they removed all the penalties for exceeding the CAFE standards. So it's like, yeah, it's on the books, but there's no consequences if you violate it. Now that could change in another bill after President Trump. But the point is, for now, CAFE standards and greenhouse gas requirements are toothless because you can't be punished for violating them.
So I would just clarify on under the endangerment finding, as people kind of refer to it, is actually in what's called Section 202 of the Clean Air Act, which deals with new motor vehicles. So the EPA can regulate pollutants under that section, regardless of this particular endangerment finding analysis for greenhouse gases. But yes, if you find that greenhouse gas emissions from new motor vehicles don't endanger public health and welfare, then no, you cannot regulate the greenhouse gas emissions from new motor vehicles. So that's absolutely true. That's the whole section of it. So
yeah.
That's right.
Yep. All right. Well, that's a very good discussion, Daren. I'm very glad that we have you on the show today to help us even dig deeper into that topic, and it's going to be a hot one. But again, as I said at the top of that little segment, the readers of the New York Times, that's all news to them, but we've been talking about it on this show for quite a long time. So, all right, we're going to get to our memes of the week, which is, oops, I keep doing this to you, Andy, I'm sorry. Memes of the week here, as you see on the slideshow there. I'm going to bring this up on stage myself, Andy, since I have it already on my computer. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, giving it away. All right. Let me try to bring it up. I don't know why it's not coming up. I'm going to remove that. Hold on. Oops, geez. I'll do it, Andy. Hold on. There we go. All right, here we go. So yeah, we can go full screen with this. So we like to share some funny stuff as we go along. Steve Malloy, friend of us personally, and also a friend of this program, has been on several times. Noticed the other day that Greenpeace media is selling these caricatures of a lot of some people on this program and others that we know very well in the climate realism community. Like here is a picture of Steve Malloy. That's him, I guess. I don't know. Oh, he's holding a cigarette and there's flames coming out of it, and there's out of a piece of coal. I don't know. That's weird. Not exactly the greatest looking caricature I've ever seen. We also have, you're in here, Anthony. We're going to find, there you are.
Yep.
Climate change denier Anthony Watts.
What's funny about that is I'm completely armless. I don't understand that. They can't even draw well.
That doesn't look anything like you.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure lots of people will spend big amounts of money to buy that too.
Yes. Well, at least they put a mustache on you, so they got that right. Here's our friend Willie Soon, who's also been on this program. He also doesn't have any arms. What a weird. In fact, nobody has any arms. That's very odd.
No, everyone's just wearing those little what are they called, snuggies or whatever that people sit around in, that they zip up. I don't have one, but I've seen people wear them. I think that's what's happening here. They just assume you guys sit around in those things.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a caricature that would not go over well if it was made by someone on the right.
Yeah.
Well, we have better artists, to be fair.
That's true. Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. All right. I see Andy. Yeah, I see Andy. You took over. There's one of let's find the one with James Taylor. There he is. Yep, that's the president of the Heartland Institute. Climate denier James M. Taylor, a caricature drawing. Now, apparently these are for sale. Greenpeace is now raising money based on caricatures of us. I don't know how much they are because I didn't want to register for with Greenpeace. I get enough spam email as it is. There's, but this list is actually
Joe Bass, former president Joe Bass.
That's right. Yeah. They would consider this a rogues gallery of climate deniers. I consider it pretty much the Mount Rushmore of climate realism. You got, Craig Idso, Joe Bass, Pat Michaels, rest in peace. Lord Christopher Monckton, Myron Ebell, formerly of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, as a matter of fact. Climate change denier Richard Lindzen, who's one of the most esteemed scientists on climate in the world. Same thing with Fred
all
Singer.
Of our free views are gone. They won't let us view anymore, maybe.
Bob
Carter. There they are.
Bob Carter, rest in peace, who worked on our big papers.
Yep, there's Dick Lindzen. We'll have to have him on the show sometime, maybe. But
where's
anyway,
the Myron one? Where is it?
Yeah, there's Myron right there in the middle, Andy. I think. There he is, Myron Ebell from CEI. So yeah, well, I think we have to start charging rent for how much we're in their heads. I don't want to go rent free anymore. I want to make money on it. So we're going to have to start charging rent to these clowns. All right. Terrific. All right, we'll move on. We do have a pretty good main topic to hit today. And that is, climate wrongthink is now apparently an international crime. Maybe they'll send Interpol after all of us. It was nice knowing you guys. But this was from, we saw this week. This is from NBC News. Actually, I think it's an AP story on NBC News. Let me just lay out a little bit for you. There's actually quite a bit to lay out, and we're going to have a little fun with it. This is from The Hague, Netherlands. The United Nations Top Court, in a landmark advisory opinion on Wednesday, said countries could be in violation of international law if they fail to take measures to protect the planet from climate change and nations harmed by its effects could be entitled to reparations. That's a scam that's been going on a while. Advocates immediately cheered the International Court of Justice opinion on nations' obligations to tackle climate change and the consequences they may face if they don't. Quote, failure to take appropriate action to protect the climate system may constitute an internationally wrongful act. We're going to play his clip here in a second. And this is a non-binding opinion, which runs to over 500 pages, and it was hailed as a turning point in international climate law. Now, you know this is a UN product when it runs to 500 freaking pages. I mean, what a joke. And so we're going to talk about that non-binding part in a moment.
I bet the executive summary doesn't even reflect what's in the body of the ruling.
Yeah, just like the IPCC reports, correct.
Yeah.
All right, first we're going to play a couple clips here, Andy. Here is the ridiculously attired Chief Justice or Chief Judge of the International Court of Justice laying down the law for us. Please play that, Andy.
The risk of significant harm to the climate system is indisputably established. Climate change poses a quintessentially universal risk to all states. This risk is of a general and urgent character, requiring the identification of a corresponding general standard of conduct to be applied subject to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. Under these circumstances, the Court recognizes that the standard of due diligence for preventing significant harm to the climate system is stringent. As concerns climate change, a heightened degree of vigilance and prevention is required. The Court concludes that the duty of states to prevent significant environmental harm applies in the context of climate change, and that this duty forms part of the most directly relevant applicable law.
Well,
no.
Two things. Two things.
Yeah, okay.
Well, just real quick. What directly applicable law? There is no law. There's no universal law mandating that people take climate change, states take climate change seriously. The Paris Climate Agreement is a voluntary agreement, which we are not a party to, just like we're not a party to the International Criminal Court any longer. So it has no binding nature on us. Secondly, didn't we sort of decisively determine that people from Japan don't get to rule over the U.S. at the end of World War II?
Well, you could try that. You could try making those arguments when they haul you into The Hague, and we'll see how that goes for you, Sterling.
Hey, free vacation for me.
Yeah, and
I'd like to go to The Hague personally.
And a permanent bungalow with bars on it for you.
I don't think that's where the prison is. But,
by the way, I just want to point out that the International Court of Justice has judges from such paragons of justice, such as Somalia, China, and Uganda. So let's let you know where things are going. And I just wanted to play real quick a clip of the star of our thumbnail for the stream today, global climate cop and prosecutor Antonio Gutierrez. He lauds the decision, of course. So let's hit that one up, please, Andy.
How to use a Scepter smart control gas can.
Nope, not the right one.
That's not right.
It's Gutierrez. Oh, grab it.
I welcome that the International Court of Justice has issued its historic advisory opinion. They made clear that all states are obligated under international law to protect the global climate system. This is a victory for our planet, for climate justice, and for the power of young people to make a difference. Young Pacific Islanders initiated this call for humanity to the world, and the world must respond. As the ICG has laid out today, the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement must be the basis of all climate policies under the current climate change treaty regime.
So Anthony Watts, apparently opposing climate communism and not abandoning fossil fuels for the rest of our lives, is against international law.
Oh dear, gosh, I'm scared. Here's the thing. This thing has no teeth, zero, none, nada. And why aren't they hauling people in China and India that are making all these coal plants into The Hague and frog marching them into court, huh?
They point.
No, they're not doing that. They're only focusing on Western countries because they view, the freedom that Western countries have as evil and it must be eradicated and you must kowtow to your betters. That's what these people are really saying here. The bottom line is that this won't make any difference whatsoever. And President Trump, if he's got any inclination to do so, might just throw the UN out of New York. Say, hey, we're done with you folks. You haven't solved a single problem in your lifetime. All you do is point fingers and complain and eat up a bunch of money. And really, there's no value to the UN. It is completely useless as an organization. It has not accomplished or solved anything except to basically grift more money from the nation states that are involved.
Yeah. Daren, are you an attorney?
I am an attorney.
You are an attorney. Okay, so I want to set this up for you before we go to let the rest of the panel also weigh in here a little bit more. Because in relation to this decision, the environmental left they're doing backflips over this. They're very happy. There was a piece in the New York Times called "Climate Science is Now the Law." And it was written by 3 environmental lawyers. And they said that this makes it much harder for any government or company to say that rules don't apply to them or they don't have to act. And read together, these landmark legal rulings leave no doubt that continuing fossil fuel production and use, let alone expanding it, violates the law. And it's a cease and desist notice to fossil fuel producers. They say that no ruling on its own can bring the fossil fuel era to an end. No kidding. Rather, it is the people who use it in litigation, legislation, and negotiations worldwide who will give it teeth and make its conclusions impossible to ignore. And now that the court has spoken, the real work begins. We cover a lot on this show using lawfare, using the legal system to impose climate communism, as we sometimes call it, on the United States. And now that's going to go global, isn't it?
Look, this advisory opinion has much to do with science. Has absolutely nothing to do with science. Has really absolutely nothing to do with law, really. It's an advisory opinion. And what happens in this particular case is, like we're used in the United States, is simply you go to a court and there's a conflict and the court resolves the conflict applying law. Here, ultimately you had a bunch of students and then one country in the Pacific and a bunch of countries asked for an advisory opinion to this court that's basically, they're not explaining what the law is. They're basically creating they're creating their lawmaking. They're basically saying they're applying their own principles and ideology and trying to establish what in effect is legislation. And that's what they're doing. And look, the United States, we have law in the United States, and other countries have laws too. So to kind of think that somehow we're going to be bound by this is silly. That doesn't mean it won't have any effect, but I think we can talk about that later, but I don't think anybody should be particularly too scared about it. But what does kind of anger me a lot is the fact that there's a big problem of conflating policy with science and whatever, and that's what we're having here. This has nothing to do with science, really has nothing to do with law. It was 15 judges on this court that's really not really analyzing a legal question, but simply just trying to make their kind of statement on what they think is what countries should do. And by the way, one of the things that has been mentioned is that one of the things they talk about is that you could get in trouble for using fossil fuels. So they do expressly say that in the opinion. And it might affect things like subsidies for fossil fuels or any type of benefits for fossil fuels or its use, consumption. So this is really an attack on fossil fuel use, and it's not kind of an abstract kind of. It didn't say anything abstract in the statement. There's an express state quote in the opinion. So it's concerning. It will be used by other countries, and it'll be used in litigation. I don't think it's something that's going to really affect us here too much in the United States or in many other countries. But it goes to show that really maybe we should be paying attention to whether we should have anything to do with the ICJ at all.
I agree with Daren that it shouldn't have much effect, but I've seen courts in the U.S. in the past take UN advisories and international criminal justice advisories and say basically apply those as if they're U.S. law, even when we're not a party to them. We know there are dozens of lawsuits ongoing that they'll say, we want to do a supplementary finding because the International Court of Justice has issued an advisory opinion, and we think you should take their advisory into account. I'd be surprised if those filings haven't happened already in many of these cases. It may have less effect here because we do have the Supreme Court as, hopeful backstop. But other courts, other jurisdictions might take this quite seriously. And if they do, because our companies operate in those countries, we're not Fortress America. Oil is an internationally traded commodity. Is it going to affect Saudi Arabia? My suspicion is no. Saudi Aramco will continue pumping out oil. Russia will continue pumping out oil while funding environmentalists to say, you got to stop pumping out oil in the U.S. But some jurisdictions might say, with this ruling, with them ruling this and we're party to this court, we need to take this more seriously. So we have to phase this out pretty quickly.
I should point out that the opinion, some countries, including the United States, is actually arguing our obligations should be connected to the treaties that we're signing on to, like if you're a party to the Paris Agreement. But they expressly reject that in the opinion. They say that's not true. This is like a customary international law, and that beyond these treaties, you have to do something about climate and not undermine the climate. So, in some ways you could just say, then what the hell are these treaties for? Which, granted, I don't like the treaties, but you get my point. That they're trying to make this some basic customary international law that is beyond the treaties. So they're trying to make it really super important. And, the concern is even if we aren't party to the ICJ or necessarily worrying about every specific opinion, well, first of all, we do that because, we want people should be respecting the sovereignty of the United States and the sovereignty of other countries. But if these types of opinions kind of find their ways into litigation, even domestically or in other countries, then it's really almost a threat to our sovereignty, even if we don't necessarily expressly kind of abide by the ICJ opinion. So it is concerning, and we got to stop giving any legitimacy to this body that is completely illegitimate.
What is the chance we can, through the back door, suggest to Vladimir Putin that The Hague is planning on invading Russia, and so he needs to act quickly to preempt this?
And I'll have to look into that.
I think, Sterling, that he would laugh and he'd pretend to believe you.
Yes, he would. We have a hard enough time getting this channel monetized, and you just screwed us over again, Sterling, with that kind of
There you go. There you go. I didn't say. I was just wondering.
Yeah. Just
hypothetical.
You're just asking questions.
Probably better than what I was thinking about saying earlier regarding them sending UN people to come arrest climate deniers or whatever.
Yeah. Well, we're actually running a little later than we had wanted at this point, but I just wanted to mention two things. If you notice the comment from Gutierrez, he was talking about how this lawsuit had originated from people who live in island nations in Oceania, like where they film the Survivor show and all that kind of stuff. And these lawsuits don't have any basis because these islands are not disappearing; they're actually growing.
Yeah,
tourism is up. That money is flowing into those islands because they're supposed to be disappearing and they're not.
Yeah.
They've been basically for years selling tourism there as come see us before we disappear. Seriously, they have, and it's been effective. They've had all kinds of tourism, and then there's new airports opened up, new hotels opened up, new resorts but come see us before we disappear beneath the sea.
Yeah, and then the solution to this, of course, is to stop using fossil fuels. And I'm just going to add to the stage here. This is a there we go. This is a chart we found from our friend Chris Martz on X, and this is the global relative energy consumption. And all that big red stuff there, that whole huge thing of that's shaded in red, that's fossil fuels. And the left side of the graph is 1965. This is percentage of fossil fuel consumption. It's identical today that it was in 1965, and it is not going down anytime soon. So the idea that the world is going to give up fossil fuels, especially because the International Court of Justice, which sounds fake and really is fake, is not realistic. So
can I just add that, they're all concerned and do the hand wringing about climate change, but what about and they're talking about policies and addressing it. But what about those policies that you're going to want to push to address climate change when they increase the prices for people all over the world for energy, or you don't have reliable energy, or you don't have clean water, you can't meet basic requirements, and it's just going to make the poor people even poorer, and people freeze during the winter, or they get, where's the concern for that? Or it hurts poor people more than wealthy people for most of these policies when you impose things like de facto EV mandates, whatever it might be. The policies are the things that we should be concerned about, and unfortunately they're not.
And it's not just cost. I mean, there are lives at risk when you cut off the use of fertilizers and crops fail and people starve. That's to me. Everyone talks about cost. I talk about harms to human beings.
Absolutely.
These policies harm human beings, and I think it odd. Look, I don't claim to be an expert on the International Court of Justice, but I ask this. My understanding is they are not part of English common law. They are to enforce actual treaties and statutes, not make up theories about common, some kind of, we all have a common obligation to protect the environment. Show me in a single treaty anywhere that anyone's ever signed where we have that. They're not ruling on what is law, international law, at all. They're making it up. They're acting like they're part of the English common law, and they're creating a common law doctrine, a common commercial law doctrine that does not exist.
This is one of the problems with international law just generally. But I mean, international law is supposed to reflect what's customary across the world, but they're somehow kind of saying they're interpreting what they think should be the world's law. And that's really what this is. It's pretty scary. It should be scary for people. Even if this wasn't about climate change or some other topic, it's scary. But it is climate change, and the power of making some type of claim like this, having people try to act upon it, and states act upon it and imposing policies. We know what the harm is of climate change policy. Imagine you've got this opinion that actually provides a little bit of ammunition for pushing those policies. That's scary.
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to get to Q&A here, and we always have a very awesome Q&A, but I have some news to share. This show is becoming more watched and more popular that we now have a sponsor. So we're very happy to welcome a sponsor to the Climate Realism Show, Advisor Metals. Now, if you listen to a lot of conservative shows, you hear a lot of pitches for buying precious metals. Well, we're here to tell you about why we trust Advisor Metals over all of them. And it's the man who runs the company. Ira Bershatsky is the managing member and owner of Advisor Metals. Ira has decades of experience in precious metals and is the only person in the physical precious metals industry who has the Commodities Future Trading Commission federal registration. What does that mean for you? It's that everything that Ira or a member of his team says to you has to be factual. There's no sales pitch and no bait and switch. Ira is held to the highest ethical standards, and there is full transparency with him. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio and your savings, if you are planning for retirement and are concerned about economic uncertainty, if you want a tangible asset that is easy to buy and sell, you can secure your assets with a wide range of physical precious metals by getting in touch with our friend Ira at Advisor Metals. Ira will make it very easy for you as well. So please visit climaterealismshow.com/metals, and you can leave your information for Ira and get started with investing in precious metals and expand your current portfolio. So again, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. And when you talk to Ira, be sure to let him know who sent you, because this helps us, and you're helping your financial future by diversifying with precious metals at Advisor Metals as well. So thank you, Ira. All right. We are now ready for Q&A, and we have a drop for that, and we have Linnea.
I love that.
Yes,
That's
happy.
Okay, guys, here we are for Q&A. We have a lot of good questions, you guys. Our audience is awesome. They always have great stuff, including very funny comments. We have very, very funny audience. All right. Let's see. Okay, so here's Ed Reed, who says, can we discuss standards of evidence for the alleged damage prior to discussing the reparations? And Daren, if you want to chime in. I don't know.
Well, that's a deep question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to answer this question accurately, or what the questioner is asking. But I would say, if we're getting at the concerns over reparations with the climate change and the loss of damage fund and things like that, I do believe that that case that we were just talking about is going to be used to make the case for the need for reparations. And then, while we may like the current administration, or many of us do, I hope, as it relates to climate change, a future administration may not be as friendly. It may be more of a climate change alarmist, and they may use that case as a way to kind of support the case for reparations for other countries. To me, the idea of reparations, I mean, what about all the benefits that these other countries have gotten as a result of the use of affordable and reliable energy? I think that needs to play a role in any type of discussion. And I certainly don't believe there should be any type of reparations for countries. In fact, again, you need to always take into account all the incredible benefits and the innovations that have resulted from the use of energy that they've benefited from. So,
absolutely, thank you. This is kind of a, I guess I'm going to pitch this one to Sterling, actually. This is from a user that I have not seen comment on our videos before, although they might have, and I just might have missed it. Max Emissions asks, how should we understand the difference or similarities between green subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies? Are they essentially the same, or are they distinct in the way that they work and what they achieve?
Well, I'm not sure what you're talking about when you say fossil fuel subsidies. There's only one direct subsidy that I know of, and that is the subsidy for carbon capture and storage. They actually pay oil and gas companies, and in some places maybe coal, to capture the carbon from emissions and store them. That's a subsidy. When the environmentalist talks about subsidies, they say that oil and gas gets more subsidies than any place in the world. In the U.S., oil and gas doesn't get subsidies for producing oil. They get what every other company in the U.S. gets, which is tax write-offs for equipment and for labor and for their healthcare cost. That's not unique to oil and gas. That is across the board corporate tax credits, write-offs. Wind and solar gets those. Oil and gas gets those. Your Home Depot gets those. The subsidies to oil and gas to renewables are direct. Their payments or credits to them for producing so much energy. They're given tax credits and help to construct their industrial parks. Homeowners have been given, except they're not going to homeowners, they're going to the companies that install solar panels on your roof. Those are direct subsidies. when they talk about more globally, oil and gas gets more subsidies than anything. In the U.S., solar and wind get more subsidies than any other energy source. Absolutely. And in terms of vastly in terms of for the amount of energy produced. But globally, they say, oh, well, but globally, oil and gas gets far more subsidies. Those subsidies are retail subsidies. In Venezuela, the government, because it wants to stay in power, keeps gasoline prices artificially low. That's not a subsidy to the company. It doesn't go to Petro Venezuela or in Brazil, Petrobras, or in Saudi Arabia to Saudi Aramco. That's not money paid to them. That is the government using taxpayer dollars to keep prices low. That's not a subsidy for production, but it does end up encouraging use because prices are artificially low. But that can't be treated the same or counted as a subsidy to big oil. It's not. And so, you know, I can't, of course, speak to whether that answers his question or not, but that's how to understand both subsidies, so-called subsidies in the U.S. and globally. When you hear, oh, oil and gas gets all this, no, oil and gas doesn't get that. Government telling their companies, sorry, we're going to sell gasoline at this price, a fixed price, and it's lower than the market would bear. That's sticking it to the companies and benefiting the consumers, but it's not a subsidy to the companies.
Thank you very much, Sterling. I knew you'd have an answer for that one. I hope that answered your question, max emissions. Yeah, they are different. We've also, if you go over to Climate Realism, I can't remember off the top of my head what the article is called, but at climaterealism.com, if you search fossil fuel subsidies or oil and gas subsidies, you'll probably come across. Nope, I don't know if I can be heard anymore. Sometimes when we switch the stuff around, I mute out. But there's an article where it's broken down into where all of the subsidy goes per source. And for things like coal and oil and gas, what tends to happen is a good amount of the money that federal government gives to those industries is in the form of R&D. And it's almost exclusively to R&D for carbon capture and storage, and like green stuff within those industries. So the idea that they're getting tons and tons of money compared to wind and solar is nonsense.
Yeah, and that chart on the screen right now showing federal subsidies per unit of electricity generated, that is on the Climate Realism site. I found it just by putting subsidies right in the search bar at climaterealism.com, and that was also shared here on Twitter as well. So neat.
All right, here's a good question for Anthony. Anthony, from Samo, they say, is the ozone hole healed, or was that just the stage one deception to prepare and cultivate the public for more scams?
Well, the ozone, based on my studies and research, the ozone hole has always been there. And the attribution of the ozone hole being created due to CFCs and other types of gases that go into the upper atmosphere has been really based on speculation. The problem is that down there in the South Pole, they've got a circulation that goes on in the winter at the upper atmosphere where there's no sunlight, you know, and they have extremely cold temperatures. And what ends up happening is ozone depletes naturally because it's not being created. With no sunlight, no ozone happens. It's just that simple. And so the ozone depletes naturally on its own. The ozone hole, so to speak, is a misnomer, and it will never be truly gone. We might have seen some improvements from CFC's reductions, but no, it's never going to go away. And I think because we've seen less and less rhetoric about it as of late, the scientific community has come to understand this, that it's a natural phenomenon that got misattributed to, you know, CFCs in the atmosphere, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of worrying about it lately.
Anthony's right. It's a misnomer because there was never a hole. There was a thinning of the ozone layer in Antarctica that they were saying would be a hole, or it was a hole, but it was never gone. And it's always been curious to me how the CFCs that are emitted largely in the Northern Hemisphere in cities where they have a lot of air conditioning, but also they were using aerosol sprays and all sorts of things, how they reached the upper atmosphere and went directly to the North Pole, to the South Pole, to reduce the ozone there as opposed to reducing the ozone above us, our heads. And the scare was, oh my God, well, we're going to have more cancer cases, more skin cancer. Well, skin cancer is a concern, but I don't know many people who are out there sunbathing in Antarctica. So that was just an earlier version of the humans are destroying the environment and it's going to kill you fairy tale.
Awesome. All righty. Oh, this is a good question from our frequent watcher and listener, Chris Nisbet, who says, will you be getting any royalties from those images, the cartoons, to go along with all of that fossil fuel funding that we get? No
yeah,
royalties?
I'm sure Greenpeace is going to write us a check tomorrow.
Yeah.
We'll get as much royalties from that as we do from fossil fuel funding, which is
exactly
0.
Alrighty, let's see.
Although I might petition them to give me arms.
Yeah. I wonder if you could request them to send you a copy
tell
of
them
it.
Not just that you want arms, but you want jazz hands.
Yeah. All right. So from Doug, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of question, but is there such a thing as international law?
Well, I mean, there is, but, it's not like, it's based on like custom, and of course there's treaties and things like that, but a lot of international law is customary. So it's kind of developed through norms or whatever. But it's completely different than the legal system that we know. But yeah, I mean, I think there's, that's a good question. That's something people questions whether or not there really should be anything kind of international law, not beyond even the treaties, just this kind of customary type of idea that we establish norms and stuff just by it because a bunch of countries or it's become customary among other nations. Therefore, we're going to just establish that as some type of international law. I mean, obviously, I think it's good to have certain treaties and basic, we want to protect human rights and there's other things, but yeah, I think it's questionable. Certainly as relates to when an institution like the ICJ and is doing advisory opinions, that certainly shouldn't be considered international law. That's just a bunch of 15 people pushing their ideological objectives and developing some type of, they think that they're world lawmakers. So that's something we need to reject.
Yeah, this is kind of related to this question from Michael Johansson, who's one of our frequent listeners here, who says, was there any defense party in this ICJ case?
I don't pretend to be an ICJ expert. My understanding is this is an advisory opinion. So you're not really, there's not a case for controversy like we would have in any type of normal case. They're really just getting an opinion from the judges, and they ask a series of questions and the judges answer the questions. So there's really not going to be a defense party. People could, I think, can submit, and parties can submit documents and argue whatever they want, but there is no defense. So there's nobody defending common sense really in this proceeding, unfortunately.
I would say concerning international law, Daren was right when he says, is there international law? The way his voice went up, I think summed it up pretty good. The truth is there is international law only to the extent that nation states are willing to enforce the decisions of the court. Was there international law when we tried the Nazis in Nuremberg or the Japanese for their war crimes? We can debate. I think you can debate whether the treaties are binding, and the Germans said, "Well, that wasn't our law. Who are we? We're just judges," and things like that. But the point is, only to the extent that nation states are willing to enforce these things are they binding. Concerning the International Court of Justice, it has the same status that Hobbes warned of in the Leviathan. where he said covenants without the sword are but words. They're sitting there spouting their opinions, their views on the science, but it has no force unless individual nation states are willing to enforce it. It has no criminal police division of its own. Interpol does not work for them. It does not. It certainly can't. We jokingly said, "Oh well, here comes the police to arrest us." They can't send police in to do that. It would only be if the U.S. or whatever nation state said, "You know what, we think that's right, and so we're gonna enforce this, and maybe even bring people before the International Court of Criminal Justice, like they've tried to do, like they've done with war crimes, and are trying to enforce for some people today." But it's Hobbes. Covenant without the sword is but words. These are words.
Yep, and this relates, I brought it up on screen here, a question from Guffpot, which I think we just pretty well answered, which is international law limited to no greater than sovereign states' will to accept it, unless there's some kind of peer pressure? And I think the answer to that is pretty much yes. Yeah. Let's see. Sorry, just a second here. Scrolling up in my list. You guys are funny. Will Sugart asks, "Where's Linnea's caricature?" I know. I don't know. I don't want to have
that's
my
your
arm
generational privilege going on there.
Yeah.
I was offended that I didn't make the caricature list. I've been doing this for a while. I guess I just don't have that standing.
Very sad.
AI will do yours for you, Linnea. We'll get that next week.
Oh, geez. I don't even want to know. Okay. And then engineer guy says, "What about having that famed artist Hunter Biden draw some portraits for us?" Thank you, engineer.
I want Banksy to do mine.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All righty. Let's go. Okay. How about this? This is a good question. This is kind of for the panel at large. Climate Bell says, "How do we inspire the leadership of the United States in breaking away from the climate change cult to engage other countries to reconsider their positions too?"
That's a great question. I think in many ways, the leadership in this country is breaking away from the climate change cult. I think we're seeing that through the actions of the Trump administration, and I think legislators are getting on board to some extent. I'd like them to be more on board with it. We saw the Inflation Reduction Act, and we saw the One Big Beautiful Bill kind of get rid of a lot of the climate change cult / New Green Deal type of language from the IRA. Didn't do enough. There are a lot more needs to be done on that. But the second part of the question is something that I've been thinking a lot about, actually, is how to engage other countries to reconsider their positions. And one idea is just simply to kind of start laying out kind of our own principles, our own views on the importance of low cost, affordable electricity, and making those types of things that are really, they shouldn't necessarily be called rights, but something that should be principles and values that other countries, I think a lot of other countries would share. And that we're not going to impose policies, develop policies that are going to knowingly hurt people in terms of being able to feed themselves, or again, to be able to turn on the lights, or even to have basics like clean water. I think what the idea would be to try to use international framework somehow. Other countries are doing this, and other organizations, NGOs, are trying to work and get countries on board with different agreements. And maybe it's something that our side, people that actually are climate realists, need to do. So I think maybe it is important to try to get engaged within the international community to some extent and see what we can do to bring other countries on board. But that is a question that I've been asking. I do think it's important.
I would like to say that Heartland's already engaged in this, right? We created Heartland UK Europe. So we're working with politicians abroad. In addition, Trump's election has changed some, has in and of itself resulted in some movement. If you look at Milei is it Argentina, I think, and some other countries. You look at Australia, but the main thing I think that will drive any kind of climate skepticism, or will it stop the virtue signaling? No. Hell, even China virtue signals on climate change. As they build a coal power plant a week, they're out there telling the world, we got to do something about climate change. It's the evil U.S. So, in Australia, they say, oh, we're leaders on climate. And then they expanded coal and natural gas over the past year. In the end, reality is taking place. And despite the rhetoric, I think the U.S. moving, no one's saying we don't want your natural gas. They're building terminals to accept natural gas. Poland just discovered a big oil and gas field in their part of the North Sea. And Germany's saying, oh, we don't want you to develop that. And Poland's sort of saying, we don't care what you want. EU, we're going to develop this. So I think reality is what is going to vitiate climate concerns over time. When people keep using oil and gas, the world doesn't come to an end. That's what the best response that I've ever heard in debate on climate change from a scientist is when I asked him, what would it take to convince you that climate change isn't happening or a catastrophe? And he said, time. Over time, all the prediction would fail, and we'd have to explain what's going on with other means. Well, I think that time is also what's going to ultimately debunk climate alarm, because countries are kind of going to keep going on their way. And with America's leadership saying, we're going to pump out as much oil and gas as we can, and we'll sell it to you. You want prosperity? Here it is in a barrel.
Yeah, and as Tex says here, which developing nation negotiated the best fleecing of the West in the climate Paris Accords? Pakistan, maybe China? I don't know. It'd be pretty tough running between a whole lot of them. So let's see.
But China fleeced us long before Paris.
Yeah.
In the I think it was the Berlin agreement. It may have been another German city, but I think it's Berlin agreement, where China's negotiator said, for the purpose of for climate change agreements, we will always be considered a developing country.
Yeah.
For all time, we're going to be a developing country. Doesn't matter how far developed we are. That's a pretty good concession they got.
Yeah, and this is a question from our a viewer over on Rumble, Mars Rock, who says, what prompted the ICJ to take up this question in the first place? Does anybody know?
Yes,
a bunch of those climate kids and their lawsuits, basically, petitioning. They couldn't get anywhere in the United States. They kept getting shot down. So they decided, well, we'll go over to the International Court and see if we can convince these fools. They did.
But it wasn't just the kids. They had to have a nation state, and Vanuatu filled that bill.
And then they work with other countries, and a bunch of other countries then got the advisory opinion, got the court working on it.
All right, here's an interesting question. I'm not sure we know the answer to this one, but this is from K1, who says, what has been the effect of U.S. aid defunding vis-a-vis green energy funding? Have we noticed anything? Daren, you might know over at CEI, no?
I don't know the answer. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll definitely be looking into that.
I think it'll take time for us to see, or to be able to even begin to track, because I think that a lot of those smaller green NGOs are immediately we saw some of them start shutting down, right? Like conveniently Just Stop Oil shut down right once USAID got pulled. So that was interesting. I don't know if they were being directly funded by it, but there were some kind of interesting timings. But yeah, I don't know if we know the answer to this one. Okay, let's see. All right, how about this one? This is from Redneck Screwloose, who has a science question. I'm going to pitch it to Anthony that says, I didn't watch the YouTube video, but there was one, I guess, that claimed climate change has caused a rise in volcanic activity. Is there any truth to this? Or I guess I would add to that, what's the background to why they would propose that?
This is a whole correlation is not causation kind of a thing. You can find all kinds of different correlations between stuff that's happened in nature and stuff that's happened in the human world and so forth. For example, the price of eggs and all kinds of things. And just because volcanism has increased globally and we've seen a slight temperature rise over the last century doesn't mean anything. It's a correlation, is not causation thing. No one has come up with a credible link whatsoever to show that climate change, that the temperature being a degree or so warmer averaged over the whole globe is causing volcanoes to erupt more. I mean, the premise is absurd. Of course, these people, whatever they can do to, create a story that will motivate people. If we don't stop climate change, volcanoes are going to erupt, lava coming from the air, all this stuff. That's all they're doing here. It's just garbage.
Big Ghostbusters, dogs and cats fornicating in the streets. The world coming to an, I'm wondering if maybe the video he's talking about is a different, the causation is different, because there are some researchers who claim that the increase in volcanism is contributing to CO2 and temperature increases. Arthur Vittorito, I don't think Joe Bastardi's done any work on it, but he's been promoting some things like that. But I don't know if I've heard of volcanoes contributing to climate change. I haven't heard climate change contributing to volcanoes becoming more active.
I have heard it with regards to undersea volcanoes, some very interesting kind. I don't want to laugh it off too much, but it's probably almost certainly not true. The idea that like thermal expansion or the increase in water in the oceans would cause pressure differences that would affect undersea volcanoes. It seems like that's a huge stretch. I'm sure you could make it happen in a computer model, though. That's what I'm certain of. I am very confident that you could make that argument using computer models designed to make that argument.
Yeah.
Here's a question from somebody that I have not seen in our chat before. I'm sorry if I haven't seen you. This is someone asking about our surface station projects. This is Purple Roads, who says, do we know a rough percentage of stations that are urban and affected by the urban heat island effect?
Well, I haven't specifically gone after looking at stations that are urban versus rural. I've been looking at the microsite effects of all stations. And what I found is that whether the stations are urban or rural, they are often placed next to heat source and heat sinks, such as air conditioner vents, or a big chunk of concrete or asphalt, or right next to a building. And so that is what we did with the surface station project. We did not go and try to ascertain what percentage is urban or rural. Those numbers are actually fairly well known and in the database supplied by NCEI. But the bottom line is that whether they're rural or urban or somewhere in between, about 96% of the stations that we surveyed, and we surveyed stations all over the country. And, we got a big random sampling between 2009 and 2022. And almost 2,000 stations went into this. And the bottom line is they're all affected up to about 96%. And NOAA has this ridiculous claim that, we can take that out, Well, when you've got a majority, 96% of stations corrupted by a localized heat sink bias or heat source bias, there's no statistical tricks that you can make with those to make them look like they are not biased. That's just total garbage.
I would say, based on my experience with Anthony's project, right? I looked at 5 or 6 stations in North and East Texas. I went out and documented them with photographs on locations. And 2 of them were urban stations, and 3 were rural stations. And one urban station in Richardson, Texas, was the only one that didn't violate the standards. It's in the middle of a major city, but it was placed properly. 100 feet from the station where it was at, away from concrete, not near an artificial heat source. Does that mean the urban heat island around it does not affect it? Well, I don't know, but it was the only one that met the standards. I went to rural locations. Joe Pool Lake here in North Texas, which is about 40, 50 miles from me. It's an Army Corps of Engineers park area around this lake that they created. You got all this acreage, all this empty acreage. They could have placed the station. Where did they place it? On the parking lot next to the station where the people work, on the concrete, within underhand throwing distance from the building, on concrete. It amazed me. And then I went to a rural station in East Texas, not in a city. I went to another one in the cities, right up next to buildings, on concrete, on the sidewalk. It was crazy. But I went to a rural station. I thought, well, here we're really going to find it to be high quality, right? It was this isolated radio station out in the middle of it. It was off a state highway, but it was out in the middle of nowhere, basically, far from 6 miles from the nearest town. And where was it? Well, it's right next to the building, next to the radio antenna and radar system, sitting on a concrete pad near the air conditioning unit. It's like, really? They had it wasn't like they didn't have acreage around it. They did. They had about 4 acres that were all cleared of trees. It was empty. They still found a way to put it right next to a artificial heat source.
Yeah, it's pretty bad out there, you guys. And people can do this individually too. Obviously, don't go onto any private property or break any laws or anything, but you can, find out where your local temperature station is and go look at it and say, well, now I know it's a little bit hotter. But you can do that without even leaving your house. You can just open up like the Weather Underground map for temperature, and you can guesstimate whether or not something is being influenced by urban heat island effect just by looking at the comparisons between the temperatures that are being recorded in like downtown areas versus suburban areas. It's pretty easy. It's significant too. In some areas, 15, 20 degrees difference at night, especially. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. All right. This is Graphite on Rumble who says, was it you guys who put out the article about the undersea volcano warming the water? Yeah, we have published stuff talking about it. We don't take a firm position on whether or not that's absolutely the case. I think you're talking about the Antarctica volcanic activity, which I think is fairly well established, though it's not quite in our wheelhouse to be able to directly research that, right?
Well,
so
I can answer that, Linnea, because I'm actually the one that's responsible for our work on this. It has been in various Climate Change Weekly posts. And what we did was we summarized the research, which is what we do in Climate Change Weekly, is we look at new research and we summarize what it's saying. Sometimes we put our first lead essay is always our analysis, but some of the others are just straight, this is what they're saying. Does it have implications? So we look at subsurface volcanic activity in Antarctica, particularly West Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula is melting ice or contributing to a rapid flow of ice. But I published in Climate Change Weekly about a couple of different studies that have talked about increased CO2 from unnoticed volcano vents and undersea volcano activity affecting temperatures.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we have much more time for questions. I'm going to hand it back to Jim here.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, we had so many questions today. We went a little long on our usual stuff. We're probably overdue for a quick one topic thing and then a whole thing for Q&A. So we'll probably queue something like that up in the very near future. I want to thank everyone in the chat and everyone watching live today. We have more than 2,000 people on all of the platforms where it is streaming: YouTube, X, Facebook, and Rumble. So thank you very much. It was probably the liveliest chat we've had for quite a while. I want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, the CO2 Coalition, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you, Andy Singer, for producing this program behind the scenes. Thank you, Daren Bakst, for being here with us today. I really hope we get to have you on again in the future. You added so much to this great program today. Remember, always visit Heartland's wonderful websites on the climate, climaterealism.com, climateataglance.com, energy at a glance, and always go to heartland.org, where you can also subscribe to the Climate Change Weekly newsletter. Thank you, Linnea. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, Anthony. Again, thank you, audience, and we will talk to you again next Friday. Bye-bye.
How dare you!